Good evening. I am Ella Lacey program, which is the opening meeting of the 2021 program of the AAUW, the American Association of University Women. I hope that yesterday was a Monday. Holidays are good, but they always make Tuesday seem like the new Monday. In which case, I am even more happy that you are joining us today. Our theme is celebrating community. In today's world, it is sometimes easier to get bogged down in lamenting the change changes that we all must endure, and to
I think we lost Ella Lacey due to an internet connection problem. Hopefully we'll get her right back on.
Martha, would you like to go ahead and move to your remarks?
Okay, yes. Shall I begin? I'd like to say a few words about the American Association of University Women, AAUW. It was founded in 1881, and for over 130 years, AAUW has been a leading voice promoting equity and education for women and girls. This is directed mostly at those of you who are not AAUW members and may wish to know something about it. We have over 170,000 members and 1,000 local branches. Membership is open to anyone, male or female, holding an associate or equivalent degree from a regionally accredited institution. Our mission statement is very simple: advancing equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. We work to achieve our mission locally, and one way we do it is by providing scholarships, and we do present 3 or 4 scholarships each year to students women students at SIU. The national organization provides fellowships, grants, and awards, funds pioneering research on women, girls, and education. Through the Legal Advocacy Fund, it challenges sex discrimination in higher education and in the workplace. Our Carbondale branch was founded in 1927. And our ways of doing things have changed and evolved through the intervening 93 years, but the core mission has always been the same: to advance gender equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. We host monthly programs September through May, and all are welcome to attend any of our business meetings or programs. We would welcome anyone who shares our goals to join AAUW. Through a special program, anyone attending this event can do so at a much reduced rate for the first year. Students may join at an even lower introductory rate. If you are interested in joining or just want more information, you may inquire through our Facebook page, Carbondale Branch AAUW, or send me an email. That information will be available at the end, but my email is S as in Sam, ELLERT @AOL.com. Please also contact me if you just want to receive notices of our programs. All of our branch meetings and programs are open to the public, and all are welcome. We're glad to have you with us this evening. We move to the presentation of Community Service Awards.
Hello? 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 Is it, hello?
You're fine, Eileen. Go ahead and you can do the introduction.
Okay, I am so pleased to introduce Carmelita Cahill for a 2020 AAUW Community Service Award. Carmelita has a BA in Public Relations and Marketing. She's a member of the Golden Key Honor Society, holds a certificate in restorative practices, has over 10 years in public and social services, and is a Sparrow Coalition board member, as I am. Sparrow Coalition is concerned with the homeless and those in poverty. Currently, Carmelita is the executive director of the Carbondale Warming Center, where I have volunteered. The Carbondale Warming Center opened this past December 1st, 2019 in a previous SIUC dorm at 608 East College and was scheduled to close its winter season on April 1st, 2020. However, with the COVID-19 pandemic and a shelter-in-place order, the warming center has remained open and had to convert from an overnight facility with one light meal per day to a 24-hour per day, 3 meals per day facility. More staff had to be quickly hired and trained, and space expanded with more cots, bedding, and supplies. With a very sparse budget, food had to be procured from various churches and organizations and brought in due to a non-functional kitchen area. The Warming Center worked with Southern Illinois Healthcare and the Jackson County Health Department to recreate and enlarge the space to accommodate social distancing and increase safety measures for an increased number of people. And I was just going to say, monitoring temperature, screening for symptoms, vigorous hand washing and sanitizing of high touch areas multiple times a day have paid off in no COVID cases in this marginalized population of 40. Per night. A separate space was created for those who became ill or who might test positive for the COVID-19 virus, so as not to spread infections. The homeless there were aided to seek regular medical appointments versus occasional ER care. Showering and clean clothes were provided, as well as a break room with books, games, cards, and magazines. An outdoor smoking space, basketball, corn toss, outdoor seating, and plants to tend were orchestrated from various donations. The Warming Center has served 276 individuals since last December and served 22,614 meals. With help from the Warming Center staff, 48 have moved on to permanent housing and provided with move-out kits and even some furniture. In these few short months, a jobs program, an interview clothes closet, a women's empowerment group, a men's empowerment group, and a go-go orientation program were created. Internet access and computers allowed the homeless to access telehealth and job sites. 60% of those who participated in the jobs program have found employment. Thus, in a few short months, with no state, federal, or grant funding, Carmelita's excellent organizational and financial skills, leadership, hard work, and dedication have resulted in these phenomenal results. She has spent many a night there on her office bed to ensure seamless operation, especially with the frequent crisis situations. The homeless are not an easy population to work with, several having mental or anger issues or are compromised by alcohol or drug use. But Carmelita's firm but fair handling of various situations with standardized practices have led to the many Warming Center success stories. In short, most directors of such a facility would have considered a job well done just to provide a blanket, a cot, a hot drink, and to keep the peace, and not even attempt all the benefits that Carmelita has been able to provide to this challenged and challenging population. She has literally turned lives around for many who had little hope nor expectations when they first walked through the door. Ella is to present the award.
It looks like Ella is still having technical problems. She has not joined us. So I don't know if we can present it without her.
I don't know, but perhaps Carmelita should pretend she's gotten the award and say her remarks. I don't know what to say. Oh,
That's a perfect idea, Carmelita.
First and foremost, I thank you for the acknowledgement. The first thing that I'd like to say is that none of this is possible without the community that we reside in. None of the programs, the meals, anything that we were able to provide has been provided through this wonderful community that we live in. It's an unprecedented response from this community for the population and for the guests that we serve here. And I stand in awe many, many days when we look at where we were in December and where we're at now, even from the beds that they sleep on, the upgrade in that, to the meals that come in, to the thoughtfulness in the meal creation, to the thoughtfulness of our community. I have one of our donors comes by every 2 weeks and drops off 2 big bags of pre-cooked meatballs. And those come in handy every time she brings them. Nothing that we've done here is possible without our community and the staff that we have here, including, and first and foremost, the committee that runs this. There are many people on there that do a phenomenal job at looking at what we're facing and thinking multiple steps ahead. And for that, I'm grateful to be able to carry on what they see as the future for the guests that we serve and in this community of Carbondale. I'm privileged to be in the position that I'm at, and I feel privileged to accept the award on behalf of the work here at the Warming Center. We thank you.
next up. Yes, go ahead.
I actually have the certificate in front of me and can read it for Carmelita. Carbondale Branch AAUW is pleased to recognize Carmelita Cahill for her service to the community, Celebrating Community Enhancing Lives 2020 Award honoree, September 8th, 2020. And now I'd like to introduce Cindy Buys. It is my pleasure this evening to introduce Professor Cindy Buys. Professor Buys is an accomplished scholar with many accolades and awards, but this evening we're focusing on her service to the community. She's the founder and director of the Immigration Detention Program at SIU School of Law, which provides legal information to approximately 250 immigration detainees annually at the Pulaski County Detention Center. She also represents asylum seekers on a pro bono basis. She serves on the boards of the Southern Illinois Immigrant Rights Project in Carbondale and the Immigration Project in Bloomington, Illinois, as well as on the International and Immigration Law Section Council of the Illinois State Bar Association. She regularly leads educational programs for the community on various aspects of immigration law. Since 2015, Professor Buys has served on the Illinois Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which has investigated issues of environmental justice, voting rights, and access to housing during that time period. She's a former president of the United Nations Association of Southern Illinois, which seeks to educate the community about the work of the United Nations and build support for its goals. She's also a proud Rotarian, supporting Rotary service projects internationally as well as locally. Finally, she's a long-serving member of the Mission Ministry of First Presbyterian Church of Carbondale, which supports several local nonprofits such as the Women's Center, the Boys and Girls Club, and the Good Samaritan Ministries. She is also a member of our Carbondale branch of AAUW, and we are proud to honor her this evening. If Ella is not available, I do have I have Cindy's certificate and I can read it. Carbondale Branch AAUW recognizes with pride branch member Cindy Buys for her service to the community. Celebrating Community Enhancing Lives 2020 Award honoree, September 8th, 2020.
Thank you so much to the AAUW for this award. It really is an absolute honor and privilege to be among the recipients of this Community Service Award. There are so many amazing and inspiring people that have been awarded similar community service awards by AAUW in the past, and to count myself among that group is really quite something. It seems especially appropriate in this year 2020, when we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, that I so much stand on the shoulders of all the amazing people that have come before me and who have made this community so wonderful, such a wonderful place to live. As Carmelita said, we don't do any of the work that we do alone. It's really part of a community, and all of the different organizations and people that I work with all serve our community to make it such a special place. So I hope that through my service, I can also inspire others to serve, and that we can all remember those who lack resources in our communities, both locally, nationally, and internationally, and lend a helping hand wherever we can. So thank you again. I really appreciate the honor.
Okay, it looks like Ella Lacey's internet seems to be down, and so she's having a hard time joining us. So I don't know if Martha, if you would be able to do the introduction for the president, or if you don't have that information, where we should go from there. Looks like you're muted.
I don't have that information. I think that it was sent to Eileen, possibly. I don't know if she has it in hand.
No, it wasn't sent to me.
Yeah, it was about for the program. I think it was just for the program. I'm sorry, I don't have it.
Dr. Mahoney, would you mind doing a brief introduction of yourself? I'm so sorry.
That is no problem. And actually, it'll be a lot briefer if I do my own. So that's good. So I'm Dan Mahoney. I'm the president of the SIU system. I started here on March 1st. And as I often say, you can't make that up. It's been the strangest time probably ever to take over any job in higher education. Before that, I was at Winthrop University, and I served as president for almost 5 years there. I spent about 7 years at Kent State as the Dean of Education, Health, and Human Services, and about 13 years at the University of Louisville, where I had a variety of faculty and leadership roles there. Also spent some time in public accounting, as well as intercollegiate athletics, where I worked for 3 years at West Virginia University and the University of Cincinnati. So tonight, if we can put the slides up, I'm going to talk about issues of race and diversity in higher education, and particularly at SIU, and what we're focused on right now. So if we can go on to the next slide. So as you all talked about at the beginning, the focus of AAUW is really on this notion of equity, and specifically here, gender equity. But one of the things throughout my career in higher education that has been a focus for me is this notion of equity. And that is trying to create a system that's fair and just for all. In fact, actually, some of my research is on equity and organizational justice. And that really means taking out the bias that exists in the system. Often we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes people leave out the equity part, but that to me is the most critical part. And what we know is that across our country in a variety of different ways, we see examples of systemic racism and systemic bias. And that's, again, racism and bias that results from inherent biases and prejudice of the policies and practices of the social and political organizations, groups, or institutions. And higher education is no different. So why do we have the issues that we do in higher education? One is I will argue that not everybody really cares about diversity, equity, inclusion as much as we say that we do. It has become kind of the thing to put in every job advertisement. I haven't applied for a job in the last 15, 20 years that has not said we're an institution committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I've often found that's not always the case, or even what they were saying was diversity wasn't what I thought it was. One of the stories I tell when I was at Winthrop, and this happened at an open meeting, so it's not something that's secret, but our board chair actually got up at one meeting and said that we need to recruit more white, Anglo, upper class males. That's my definition of diversity. Clearly, I had a very different definition of diversity, and that probably explains some of the conflict we had there. But again, they were one of those many places that said that they believed in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Second, we believe we're already doing a better job supporting diversity than most of society. Some of this comes from the constant criticism of being liberally biased that we have in higher education. And so we assume that we're different than everybody else and that we don't really need to focus on diversity because we're more liberal, we're already doing it. We don't need to change what we're doing. Third thing I find is I've often run into this. We've tried it before and it did not work. So when I was at the University of Louisville, they went through a big diversity hiring program right before I got there, and it failed pretty dramatically. And every time after that, it's like, well, we really can't hire diversity. We tried it and it didn't work. Well, if you looked at what they did, it was clear why it failed. It wasn't because they just didn't do it right, and they did it in a very poor way, and it led to the negative results that ended up happening. Likewise, when I was at Kent State, I developed an office focused on recruiting and retaining diverse students, particularly in education programs. And again, that was one where people told me, don't try this. We tried it before and it didn't work. And I said, well, you tried something. It didn't work, but I do believe there's something we could try. And actually, we had enormous success with that program. Criticizing the system is personal. We have to remember that anything that happens is, or any system is a system that those of us who've reached the top have thrived in. So I benefited from this system. I benefited often from the systemic racism that exists. In some cases, the personnel policies that helped to promote me were ones I developed. And so when we attack the system or we attack the policies, it sounds personal. And it may perhaps suggest to some people you didn't get what you, or you didn't earn what you got, or that perhaps you have some level of racism yourself is why you didn't notice it. And so when it becomes very personal, it's hard for people to make changes in those cases. Next thing is that we often lack diversity when making decisions and developing policies. Many of our policies are historical, and they were developed at a time where we lacked diversity among faculty or staff that were developing those policies. Or even in one of the examples I used when I was at the University of Louisville, at one point we didn't have enough women's sports compared to men's sports, enough women opportunities in athletics. And I was on a very, very large committee that was looking at what things we could do better. And so the suggestion that came from one of the subcommittees was that we would add women's golf, women's lacrosse, and women's equestrian. And I was off in a quarter so no one could see me, but we all had microphones. And I said, really, are we just going to add rich white women's sports? And it was funny because the person who heard it didn't know where the voice had come from, like it had come from above, but it hadn't. And again, the only reason I even recognized it is my area of sports management. So I had studied that topic for a while and understood it better. But all the people in there thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing something really focused on equity, improving opportunities for women, but hadn't considered race at all in their discussions. Next is that we are vulnerable to resistance to change just like everybody else. I don't know how many times in my career I've heard we've always done it this way. As much as we think that we're open to change, quite often we're not for, again, a variety of different reasons. Last thing is that there's a lack of commitment from the leadership. Often in organizations, people will look towards the leaders of those organizations and see whether that commitment actually exists. When I was at Winthrop, one of the things I did every year was I went to SREB hosts a conference for minority doctoral students. It's the largest gathering of minority doctoral students in the country. About 1,000 are at the conference every year. And I would go to recruit potential faculty members at that conference. I'm the only president in the United States who ever showed up for it. And at one point, the Board of Trustees chair asked me why I was going. Were we getting enough people hired from that? And I was like, you're not really seeing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that sends a message to everybody on our campus that I take this seriously enough to give up 2 days and go down there and spend my time doing this. We also used it every time we try to recruit someone into a leadership position or a faculty position. that our president is the only one who goes to this conference. So it was meaningful because it showed a commitment of time and from the leadership. And I will say, during my brief time here at SIU, my leadership, the people I look to are the board of trustees. And we're doing a lot, as I'll talk about in a second, when it comes to dealing with systemic racism and systemic bias. And I keep waiting for somebody to tell me to stop, and then I've gone too far, but they haven't yet. And so that, to me, has been incredibly reassuring and makes me want to do more. Last thing I would say is we have the opportunity to do the right thing, and it's also the smart thing. Sometimes those two things come together in ways I think people don't expect. Change is coming to higher education, particularly when it comes to diversity. We often talk about that, whites will no longer be a majority in our population in whatever year it is, 2030, 2035. But if we look at people under 18, that's already the case. So our potential students of the future already are very diverse. And if we're not prepared for that or thinking about that, we're going to fail. And if we really focused our attention on, as the board chair there suggested, rich, white, Anglo upper class males, that's probably 10 to 15% of the potential student population. And no university is going to succeed focusing just on that portion of the population. Next slide. So since this summer, we have developed a number of task forces that have been focused on what we can do better. Each campus has its own task force. We have one at the Carbondale and Edwardsville campus, as well as the School of Medicine. We also I've signed the SIU Diversity Advisory Council to be our task force at the system level. And they've been meeting throughout the summer, both as large groups and subcommittees. The Diversity Advisory Council actually developed a list of 12 recommendations for changes that were shared with the chancellors. And that list is actually available on the system webpage. I'm not going to go through all of it. But some of those recommendations will be addressed at the system level. Some are really more focused on what happens at the campus level. One of the SIU Diversity Advisory Council subcommittees also developed a list of assessments, also available on our website, that focus on how do we monitor whether we're doing better, both at the system and campus levels. I'm a big believer we have to hold ourselves accountable for moving forward. And one of the ways you do that is to consistently measure what you're doing, how successful you are. Again, at Winthrop, we did a lot of that measuring of recruitment, retention of students, of faculty and staff, and actually had quite a bit of success across all those groups. But it was important for us to consistently assess ourselves. And if we weren't as successful as we wanted, then it's an opportunity to go back and change what you're doing. We've taken a number of immediate actions already. The leadership on both campuses have added or increased the leadership team and who's in the room, and that's including our chief diversity officers on the campuses. We're focusing on what we can do better from a training standpoint. That's one of the subcommittees at the system level. Focused on different things that we can do from a recruitment and retention standpoint for faculty and staff, providing more mentoring opportunities. Edwardsville has actually put another $1 million in the Strategic Hiring Initiative Fund. Students, we're focused again on what we're doing differently in recruitment and retention, some of which I'll talk about in a second, but we've already made some changes in curriculum changes and others that will impact our students. I'm in communication, and one of the things we've been doing over the last several months is what we're calling conversations of understanding. We are addressing different issues. Systemic racism was the first one. Second one focused on hate speech. Next one coming up will focus on race-based trauma and mental health issues. And so there's a lot of things that we're going to focus on in each one of these and bringing together a diverse group of participants from across the system. Next slide. Now, so I want to focus on a few things that we're doing and things that we will continue to do, because again, there's a lot of work still to do. When we look at the educational experiences of our students, a lot of it comes down to curriculum development and how we've developed the curriculum. And again, much like everything I talked about earlier, tends to, over time in higher education, be white male dominated. I actually talk in my classes about the history of higher education, and obviously early Harvard, Yale, that influenced everything else was very white male dominated. So the things they focused on in the curriculum, whether it was the books that people read or the philosophers they studied, tended again be rather white male dominated. And in fact, one of the things I've heard from several faculty members, colleagues that I'm friends with over the years, and I just use history as an example, but you could put any other subject in there, is that when we try to diversify the curriculum at times, we'll get from students, well, we want to learn real history. which is history primarily of white society, lacks that diversity again, and often white male society. And so there's pushback often when we try to diversify the curriculum. There's some ideas I think we can do that will take away some of that pushback, but again, that's going to take some work. And that's one of the challenges certainly in making some of those changes is we know there'll be some resistance to it from the students, but also from faculty and others. And one of the things that I've heard from a few people, and it's a very good point, all of us came through an education system that was inherently biased. And we learned that curriculum that was white male dominated. So most of us really were not trained to teach a more diverse curriculum. And so some of that's going to take not just educating our students, but educating ourselves about what we could do differently. We're again a product of that system, and we need to learn to move beyond our own education. Go back a second. Yeah. Now, I think there's opportunities, and often I will tell you, being in higher education for over a quarter century, the quick and easy thing is always, well, we'll add a diversity class. We'll add one requirement. I'm a big believer that that falls far short of what we need to do. And not that that's a bad thing, but I don't think it does as much as that we should be doing. There's a number of things that we can do on top of that. When I was at Winthrop, and again, this wasn't my decision, but a number of the common books that we use for incoming freshmen really focused on these issues of equity and fairness and diversity. And so that was something that every student read coming in. So that goes across everybody. And it was infused into the first year classes that they took in a variety of different ways. And so that became a common experience for them. Winthrop, we also actually had a cultural events requirement as well, which required students outside of their curriculum in order to graduate to attend a certain number of cultural events, which again was a way of exposing them to diversity in a broad sense, in a variety of ways. We also need to rethink all of our courses and really redefine what is real history. And that means it's not just one thing, but it can be a variety of different things that we can do across all of our classes. And as I often talk about, I've taught a lot of different classes. Almost all of them had some focus on race issues, on gender issues, on a variety of different diversity issues. Even if the class does not have diversity in its title or in its course description, it's hard to tell the history, for example, of college athletics without discussing race and gender. That almost is naturally there. And it's just finding a way to infuse that again into the classes we're teaching. So real history becomes a much broader sense of what history is. Next. Faculty and staff recruitment is important for a number of reasons. The faculty and staff, frankly, rarely look like the diversity of our student body. When we look at Southern Illinois University, I think it's about 27% of our students are students of color, and 18% of our faculty and staff are. When I was at Winthrop, it was actually a much larger gap. 45% of the students were students of color, and only 14% of the faculty and staff were. And there's lots of issues related to that. What it does for those few faculty of color tends to tax them more. Students tend to go to them more for support, and there's fewer of them. That there's an issue there. And it's really not as rich of an educational experience for any student, whether they're a student of color or a white student. I often talk about in my educational experience, I only had one Black faculty member. If you think about that, kindergarten through doctoral program, one Black faculty member. But he's also the Black faculty member who got me to be an educator, who's the one who talked to me first about writing for publications, for being a doctoral student, and eventually becoming a professor. In my early classes, I often modeled after what he did. So, having those faculty of color who get you to think differently and open you up to educational experience, I think is important for all of us. Now, how do we typically recruit faculty and staff? And this is where our problem is. I'll tell you the typical approach is we do an advertisement. In that advertisement, we say we have a commitment to diversity, which everybody does. We put it on diversity listservs, and then we get a pool that lacks diversity, and we said, well, we try. And the fact is we didn't really try. We did the minimum. We did the bare minimum that everybody else did, and we end up with the same result of not having diversity in the pool, and we fail at the very beginning. I've always said the most important step is actually putting together the pool of candidates. At the end of the day, we hire the best person for the job, but if we lack diversity in our candidate pool, then ultimately we'll lack diversity in the people that we hire. One of the things we have done different places I have been is change that process, which I'll talk about in just a second, and things that we can do differently throughout the entire process. There's certainly some challenges when we're trying to recruit faculty and staff, and some of that relates to the lack of diversity in the pipeline, that we have not, either in two different ways. We haven't developed enough faculty of color through our doctoral programs to fill some of the positions that we have. We also have not set up a lot of both women administrators of color into positions that would let them move up to the next level. I remember I had a student when I was at the University of Louisville, young African-American student, very, very bright guy. And he said, well, the athletic department offered me this job, and it's great, opening job. I looked at the job description. It's like, they're not giving you any experience that's going to help you move up. You have the potential to be a athletic director, or at least a senior associate AD, but they're giving you all the things that will keep you from ever doing that. So we often haven't set people up to be successful and move up to the next position. We often talked about it when I was at Louisville with my colleagues. It wasn't glass ceilings, it was glass walls. They weren't in the right path to move up to the next position. So we have some challenges, but there are, I think, far more opportunities. We can do a lot more to develop the next generation of faculty and leaders. We can find opportunities to get people those experiences that will help them move up and move into leadership roles. When it comes to faculty, hey, we have got doctoral programs, and we need to do a better job. In fact, we're going to be announcing very soon a partnership with the SREB, again, the organization I talked about earlier, where we'll be sponsoring students to be able to participate in their programs, which have had, again, great success in producing faculty of color who've been extremely successful. We need to be much more aggressive in our approach. And again, when I talked about going to that conference, but other things we can do, going to conferences, looking for potential candidates all the time. I was always amazed when I was a dean of education. AACTE, which is the major teacher education organization, had the Home Scholars Program, which was, again, focused on increasing diverse PhD students. And they would have their time to present. And I would go and I'd be like the only dean in the room. And I was like, all of you are saying you want to recruit diverse candidates, and there's an opportunity to go and listen to them present their research and really almost interview them before you even invite them to campus. And I'm like the only one showing up. And I always felt like when I told people that I was giving away my secret, but the next year I'd be the only one again. So again, there's a lot more we can do to be more aggressive. And if it's not going to conferences, it's making phone calls. It's really being much more aggressive in looking for potential candidates. When I was at Kent State and Winthrop, I had for every position, faculty and senior leadership positions, they had to develop a recruitment plan. And part of that plan was, how are you going to make sure there's diversity in your pool? When I work with search firms, I talk with them about the importance of, and I push them on that, trying to get a diverse pool. So again, there's a lot of things that we can do throughout the process. One of the other things I think we can do too, in the hiring policies and practices, is changing the way we put together search committees. A lot of times, again, we haven't thought about the diversity of the search committee. I know right now Edwardsville is focused on developing equity advisors, which are people who will be focused on those equity issues throughout the process. That's one of the things that they're assigned to be, kind of advocates for that. When I was at Winthrop, we did implicit bias training with all of our search committees. I will tell you, sometimes people push back on that one, saying, well, it doesn't really change anyone's opinion, that it doesn't really work. But what it does do is it gets people talking about those issues and recognizing when they happen. And I remember one search particularly where we had it was a white female candidate, that there was some clear gender bias coming from one of the search committee members, and other people called them out on it. And that person did ultimately make it to the finals in that particular pool. They ultimately decided not to pursue the job. But again, having other people who are able to point that out, I think, is an important part of the process. Support for retention. Again, one of the things Edwardsville is doing is developing a relationship with the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity that's focused on really providing mentoring opportunities. So once we hire people, are we mentoring them and helping them move along in order to be successful and be promoted? Affinity groups, we're developing those, particularly at the Carbondale campus, providing different mentoring opportunities. So there's a lot we can do relative to retention. As far as promotion policies and practices, this is another one where sometimes we fail. Often, again, we're set up to look at what counts in ways that have some biases in it we don't recognize. So when we look at service, because we don't have as many diverse faculty as we would like, we sometimes overtax them, but give them no credit in the promotion process for the fact they've been asked to do more than other faculty often are. From a research standpoint, particularly if they're doing research on some of those diverse issues, sometimes those are not in with the quote unquote premier journals. They're in kind of new emerging journals because it's new and emerging research, and we don't give it quite the same credit. So thinking differently about what really is quality research can help out as well. And finally, even teaching. We know that there's biases in teaching evaluations, and sometimes that's also not considered during the promotion processes. And so, you know, recognizing that while we can use teaching evaluations, there's some issues with them, will help, particularly if, as I mentioned earlier, they try to teach more diverse history that might come out in those teaching evaluations. And we certainly do not want to hold that against them as they're going through the promotion process. Next slide. Now I'll finish with student recruitment, retention, and graduation. Again, there's lots of examples of failures out there, but there's lots of examples of success. Georgia State particularly, extremely diverse student population, both from a socioeconomic and racial diversity standpoint, and has done incredibly well with retention and graduation rates. So there are examples out there that we can follow. So it's not, you know, we often talk about the lack of success, but there's places out there that were successful. Winthrop, where I was, and again, I don't take any credit for it because it existed long before I got there, had no racial achievement gap. There was actually a higher graduation rate for Black and Latinx students than there was for white students. And again, small percentage difference, but there really was no achievement gap whatsoever. Again, there are some challenges in trying to recruit, retain, and graduate. Not all are often, some think about them more academic, some of them are really financial challenges. And that has increased over time as tuition has gone up. Those financial challenges become even greater. So what are some of the opportunities? Use of test scores. Again, we've gone test optional here in Carbondale, and we're about to announce more formally that we're test optional as well on scholarships. So merit scholarships will no longer be attached to test scores. They'll be based on high school performance, GPA, and class rank. And that actually makes some sense. When I was at Winthrop, one of the things I did was I looked at the success of our students and found that high school achievement actually predicted about 25% of the variance in college achievement. SAT score is 1%. Negligible, but our scholarship program was largely based on SAT scores. It makes no sense, and we know those tests are inherently biased. And we were not alone. Winthrop was actually the typical example of how we use test scores. So these things we can do differently. What that does is it both makes it more fair. So again, getting back to the notion of making it more fair, but also will help to make sure that will help with our retention because it takes away some of those financial issues I just talked about, which gets us to our scholarship programs. Again, changing our scholarship programs, focusing on doing more for those coming from poorer backgrounds. Again, those who may not have done as well on those tests because of the biased natures of those tests. We can do a lot with our scholarship programs and raise money for additional scholarships, which is also one of the things we're focused on. Providing a more supportive environment when students get here. You know, one of the things I noticed when I was at Kent State, we had really gone down in diversity within our college. In many classrooms I would look in and there'd be one student of color, and it was not a real supportive environment for them. So that was when we developed, again, that office that helped to provide more programming and more things. It wasn't really academic support. It was more social support and a feeling like you belonged at the institution. And that made a huge difference, again, dramatically increased the success rate of the students we recruited, and actually we recruited more students because of that success rate. In fact, it was so successful in my college, they started similar offices in every college across the institution. So there are things we can do to create a more supportive environment. And then again, support for retention. You know, there's two things really that I think are critical. Again, a lot of times people drop out because of a lack of resources. One of the things we did at my last two institutions was develop what we call last dollar scholarship funds, with things that whether someone needed $200 or $500 or $1,500, that we had money we had available for scholarships to help them continue on with their education. Also, one of the things in the Georgia State model, they have that, as well as a lot of intervention throughout the time the student is there at Georgia State. If they see something in their grades that may say they're on the wrong path, then they bring them in for advising and talk through what they may need to do. Again, a lot of those focuses even on grades you get in particular classes. So, if I get a C in biology, I'm an accounting major, that might be okay. But if I'm a biology major, it may mean I need to change a major. And by having that conversation after your first semester in college may allow you to stay on the right path and move towards graduation. So again, there's a lot we can do. Next slide. Last slide. Yep. But we're just getting started. So again, a lot of this will take some time to do, particularly when we talk about curriculum changes in policies will take us some time, but we're committed to doing it and feeling like I've got the people around me and the support from above to be able to do some pretty exciting things over the next couple of years. So I'll answer any questions anybody has.
Yes, we've received a question. Are there any plans to increase local diversity recruitment of students? I believe recruitment of local students of diversity.
Yeah, and we actually had we went up pretty dramatically with the freshman class in Carbondale this semester, but even slightly more with local students. But yes, part of the goal is to focus on diversity that's local, but really diversity across the state. So Chancellor Lane has already been reaching out pretty aggressively with superintendents. He's met with more superintendents than I think I did my entire time at Winthrop just in the last couple months. And some of those local, but also in the Metro East area, in Chicago area. So really looking at all of those potential sources for students. And I think that will help us to increase the diversity of the students we're recruiting. And then also developing some programs that I think will help make students feel more welcome and better prepared to come here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have something I'd like you to address, and that has to do with retention of staff and faculty. Well, my internet connection is unstable, it says, so I will try to get this out before I go down. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Anyway, thank you. Before retiring almost 20 years ago, I directed a program called University Women Professional Advancement, which now no longer exists. But we were dedicated of retaining women faculty and staff. And we had quite a program, mentoring, a very strong mentoring program, professional development grants. We worked at partner placement as best as we could, administrative internships. And with all that, and we had some successes, it was really hard to retain the women faculty. Even when they had administrative internships and they were ready to go to an administrative position, there didn't seem to be the support from on high for them to actually get it. So they'd go to another university for the administrative position. So I just thought you might say a few more things about retention.
Yeah, and again, I think everything you talked about there is important. It's what you were doing was providing a group that was mentoring, which I talked about a little bit, providing them additional opportunities to learn and be prepared to move up. Sometimes, again, I can't speak to whether there was support in the past or not, but certainly we're trying to find opportunities to keep people here and giving them opportunities to move up. But also I work for a president who used to always say, part of our goal is not just to influence what happens here at our institution, but to create a pipeline of outstanding women leaders, outstanding diverse leaders that can be successful anywhere. And sometimes even when they leave us, that's still a success for us because we prepared them to move on to a provost position somewhere else or a presidency position somewhere else or a dean position. And he always put that as a source of pride. And I think about that a lot too. Sometimes we are going to lose them occasionally, but it's actually helping out higher education as a whole. And they will always be able to say they came from Southern Illinois University and they still have that connection. And so there's some benefit to that. But whenever possible, when we want to keep them here and find opportunities for them to continue to move up where they were. Again, I always look at my time at Louisville. For 13 years, I kept moving up until I ran out of places to move to there and then moved on. But I always appreciated the fact that they kept finding me new opportunities. And we need to be doing that more with women and diverse leaders as well.
Well,
I had a question. This is Eileen. Is it okay to ask one? Or
Yes.
I can't figure out the chat. Sorry.
That's
I was
okay.
gonna say that at one point, and I don't know if we're still doing it at SIU, and I did teach full-time 30 years and then 10 years part-time, and now I'm emeritus faculty. But I was going to say that for retention, I think that what you were saying about social support is very important. And at one point we were putting students of the same program into, the same dorm or same floor or whatever. Are you still continuing to do that, like architectural students or automotive or flight or healthcare? That seemed, I thought, was something that was working.
Yeah, and the learning community model is pretty well established at most institutions now, which is really what you're talking about. But sometimes they also have developed learning communities that aren't necessarily academic program based, but based on areas of interest. So interested in international studies or interested in something else. But regardless, it's trying to find something where you can easily connect with the other people in your residence hall. And we do find those do tend to help with retention as well. So yeah, those programs still exist and they're still a real benefit.
The other thing I was going to say, it seems like in the past we've had trouble attracting Latino students in our area because we don't have many down here. It's not like we're in Chicago or a metropolitan area. But I was also thinking, do you ever, are even minority students together, or do they tend to do an Hispanic together, or do they tend to do that anyway? Would that give them more community support?
Yeah, they are, again, same type of thing. We are trying to do that across all the different racial groups. So I participated in a bunch of events last week. There was a Black student group, Latinx group, Asian Pacific Islander group, LGBTQIA group. So again, developing those kind of relationships from the very beginning. I will say, back to what I talked about earlier, one of the things that when you look at the demographic data going forward, the fastest growing population in the United States is among younger kids is the Latinx population. So universities that are not focused on creating a welcoming and sense of belonging for the Latinx population is really going to lose out in the next 10 years because that is the population that is growing the fastest. And I would say most universities, and I don't think we're there yet either, have done nearly as much as they could. So we are doing some things, but I still think there's opportunities to do far more.
I had another question on a different issue. You were talking about minorities and so on. I'm in a Bible study group that's talking about white privilege and being aware of white privilege. And I think that needs to be a lot of work done in those of us that are white and privileged to a certain extent, of recognizing how we don't see what we don't see in diversity, what we don't see, and are not even aware of these things.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. And I think that's part of our education, both for students, but also for us as faculty and staff, and kind of understanding that. And again, that's one, as I talked about earlier, sometimes we get pushback because people feel like, well, you're saying I didn't earn the position I got. And it's not exactly what we're saying, but you had opportunities and there's certain privilege that go along with that. And as I talk about, I moved up in leadership positions throughout my career, and I like to think I earned everything, but I can't ignore the fact that I'm a white, cisgender, heterosexual, Christian male. And some of those things were immediately obvious the second I walk in the door. And there's certain advantages that go along with that. I look like what people expect a leader to look like. And that is just the reality. I can't change that. Some people talk about feeling guilty, but I don't feel guilty about it. But I also think there's an obligation on my part to try to make sure everything is as fair as possible for everybody else when I'm in those leadership roles. But it's hard for people to admit sometimes that they had some benefit from that. And even sometimes the benefit is simply not dealing with the biases that some of our colleagues dealt with throughout their career. Not being questioned. I always talk about, when I first started teaching, I was 29 years old. I looked not much different than the students at that point, but no one ever questioned whether I deserved to be in front of a classroom. No one questioned my credentials. No one questioned anything about me. But I talked with my Black colleagues and Latinx colleagues, and they did not have that same experience. They were questioned about whether they deserved to be teachers or professors when they were in the same position that I was in.
Unfortunate, yes. Thank you.
It looks like we might have.
I am seeing that. Yeah, there are questions in chat, I was going to say, but I can't access them. So.
Okay, it looks like we might have time for one more question. Here's one. What can SIU do to foster social justice commitment by students?
Yeah, and I think it gets back to what I talked about in the curriculum and in the educational experience. There's lots of things I think we can do differently. You can never get someone to be committed to something. But what you can do is make sure they understand, again, some of the biases, some of the systemic biases that have existed in American society for a long period of time and still exist in American society. And while not all will change the way they view based on that, some will, and some will take on a greater commitment. And even sometimes it's just having them be more open-minded. I always remember I had a student when I was teaching a class on college athletics who was very anti-Title IX. Thought Title IX was the worst thing that ever happened to college sports. It was a complete disaster. And at the end of the semester, he came up to me and says, I'm not sure I'm in love with Title IX, but I don't think it's a complete disaster anymore. And I was like, that's a victory. I'll take that one. He was not going to be a Title IX advocate, but at least he wasn't going to be a detractor anymore. At least he wasn't going to be spouting off things that weren't true anymore. At least I got him to that point. And that, to me, is sometimes as good as we can do. But it was exposing him to all of the issues related to Title IX in that class that was helpful and changing his perspective. So again, it's looking at our curriculum, looking at what we do as part of the student experience that can, I think, have an impact.
It looks like we still do not have Ella Lacey back to do the closing remarks. So I don't know if any of the other members of the group could possibly do some closing remarks.
I can. If I got a message that I have an unstable internet, but I'm still here. I want to thank everyone for your attendance this evening. We appreciate it so much. Community service recipients, you will receive your certificates, and we're so happy to have been able to honor you. And thank you so very much to President Mahoney for your time and for your presentation and taking the time to answer questions. We are very grateful to the library staff as well. And especially Jennifer Robinson, Diana Brawley Sussman. Thank you so very much. And good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
And more information about AAUW is being shown now, how you can get in touch, how you can read our Facebook page, and so forth. So we hope to see more of you in the future. Oh my.